It's a quiet morning in 1978. The sun's barely up, and the world feels soft, safe, like it's still waking up. A professor at Northwestern University gets a package in the mail. It's wrapped in brown paper, nothing fancy, just another delivery, right? Except it's not. The moment that package is opened, the air splits with a deafening boom. Shrapnel rips through flesh, blood sprays across the room, and a campus security guard is left clutching his mangled hand, screaming in agony. The scene is chaos. Paper scattered, desks overturned, the acrid smell of gunpowder choking the air. Nobody knows it yet, but this is the first note in a symphony of destruction, a 17-year reign of terror that'll leave bodies broken and a nation on edge. This wasn't a one-off. Over the next 2 decades, packages like this, innocent-looking, meticulously crafted bombs, would show up in mailboxes, offices, and parking lots across America. They didn't just explode, they devastated. Picture a computer store owner in Sacramento, 1985, stepping outside his shop. He sees a strange wooden box in the parking lot. Maybe thinks it's trash. He nudges it with his foot, and in a split second, his world ends. The bomb tears through him, shredding muscle and bone, leaving him a lifeless heap on the asphalt. His name was Hugh Scrutton, and he was the first to die. But he wouldn't be the last. These weren't random acts of violence. Each bomb was a message, a calculated strike against a world the bomber believed was rotting at its core. Universities, airlines, tech companies. His targets were symbols of progress, of society he despised. And the scariest part? He was a ghost. For years, the FBI chased a shadow, a faceless killer who left no fingerprints, no clues, just carnage and fear. They called him the Unabomber, a name born from his early targets, universities and airlines. But behind the alias was a man, a brilliant, broken man named Theodore John Kaczynski. This story isn't just about the bombs. It's about a mind so sharp it could cut through steel, yet so fractured it turned to murder. It's about a loner who lived in a shack in the wilderness, plotting his war against the modern world. It's about the lives he shattered, the families he tore apart, and the manhunt that became the FBI's longest, most expensive obsession. So, let's pull back the curtain and step into the darkness. Let's meet Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and unravel the horror he unleashed. Let's start with the crimes, because that's where the terror hits hardest. Picture yourself in 1978, living in a world where mail bombs aren't even a concept yet. The first attack was May 25, 1978, at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. A package, wrapped in plain brown paper, shows up on campus. It's addressed to an engineering professor, Buckley Chris, but the return address is his own, which is weird. Chris, suspicious, hands it to campus security. A guard named Terry Marker opens it, and bam, the package erupts. The blast isn't massive, but it's enough to tear through Marker's hand, sending him to the hospital with cuts and burns. It's a crude device, not perfect, but it works. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Someone out there is smart enough to build a bomb from scratch and crazy enough to send it through the mail. A year later, May 9th, 1979, another bomb shows up at Northwestern's Technological Institute. This time, a grad student named John Harris picks it up. The explosion is small but vicious, injuring his arm and leaving him shaken. Then, November 15th, 1979, things escalate. A bomb hidden in a package detonates in the cargo hold of American Airlines Flight 444, flying from Chicago to Washington, D.C. The device doesn't bring the plane down, thank God, but it fills the cabin with smoke, forcing an emergency landing. Passengers are coughing, panicking, some injured from inhaling the fumes. The FBI is starting to connect the dots. This isn't random. Someone's targeting universities and airlines, and they're getting bolder. By 1980, the Unabomber's got a rhythm. June 10th, 1980, Percy Wood, the president of United Airlines, gets a letter at his home in Lake Forest, Illinois. It's polite, formal, signed Enoch W. Fisher, promising a book of social significance. A few days later, a hollowed-out copy of Ice Brothers by Sloan Wilson arrives. Wood opens it, and the bomb inside explodes with a force that rips through his body. His face and hands are shredded, his kitchen a blood-splattered wreck. He survives, but he's scarred for life, physically and mentally. The brutality is escalating, and the Unabomber's leaving his mark, literally. Hidden in the bomb's wreckage, investigators find metal plates stamped with the initials FC. Nobody knows what it means yet, but it's a taunt, a signature from a killer who's playing a long game. The attacks keep coming, each one more sophisticated, more sinister. In 1981, a bomb at the University of Utah causes no injuries but sends a clear message: nowhere safe. In 1982, a secretary at Vanderbilt University, Janet Smith, opens a package and loses part of her hand. That same year, a Berkeley engineer and professor, Diogenes Anglikos, is maimed by a bomb disguised as a gasoline can. By 1985, the Unabomber's bombs are lethal. December 11th, 1985, Hugh Scrutton, a computer store owner in Sacramento, spots a wooden box in his shop's parking lot. He bends down, touches it, and the world goes white. The bomb shrapnel tears through his chest, slicing his heart and lungs. He's dead before he hits the ground, blood pooling around him as horrified onlookers scream. The Unabomber takes a mysterious 6-year break after a 1987 bombing in Salt Lake City, where a witness spotted a man in a hooded sweatshirt placing a device. The sketch, aviator sunglasses, hoodie, a blank expression, becomes iconic, plastered across every newspaper. But the trail goes cold. Then, in 1993, he's back, and he's deadlier than ever. June 22nd, 1993, a geneticist named Charles Epstein opens a package at his home in Tiburon, California. The blast nearly kills him, blowing off several fingers and leaving his kitchen a smoking ruin. 2 days later, Yale computer scientist David Galerner opens a similar package. The explosion mangles his hand, blinds one eye, and leaves him fighting for his life. The final blows come in 1994 and 1995. December 10th, 1994, Thomas Mosser, an advertising executive in New Jersey, opens a package in his kitchen. His wife and daughter are nearby, decorating a Christmas tree. The bomb detonates, shredding Mosser's body. His wife later recalls his soft moans, his dangling fingers, as she held his hand and begged for help that came too late. April 24th, 1995, Gilbert Murray, a timber industry lobbyist, opens a package at his office in Sacramento. The blast is so powerful it blows through walls, killing him instantly and leaving his co-workers traumatized. 16 bombs, 3 dead, 23 injured. Each attack meticulously planned. Each bomb handcrafted with scrap materials, wood, nails, wires, batteries, designed to evade detection. The Unabomber didn't just kill. He terrorized a nation, making every mailbox a potential death trap. But who was he? How does someone become this kind of monster? Let's step back and meet the man behind the madness. Ted Kaczynski wasn't born a killer. He was born a genius, a kid with a mind so brilliant it set him apart from the world. And maybe that's where the trouble started. Born May 22nd, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, Theodore John Kaczynski, Teddy to his family, was the first son of Wanda and Theodore Richard Kaczynski, a working-class Polish-American couple. His dad worked in a sausage factory. His mom stayed home, later becoming a teacher. They were regular folks, hard-working, proud of their brainy son. But even as a kid, Ted was different. His IQ was tested at 167, putting him in the top 0.1% of the population. He wasn't just smart. He was a prodigy, a math whiz who skipped grades and left teachers in awe. But genius came at a cost. Ted was a loner, socially awkward, never quite fitting in. At 9 months old, he was hospitalized for a severe allergic rash, separated from his parents for weeks. His mom later told the FBI she believed this trauma scarred him, planting seeds of isolation that grew over time. By elementary school, Ted was skipping grades, 5th to 6th, then 10th to 11th, leaving him younger and smaller than his classmates. Kids called him a nerd, a weirdo. He'd rather bury his nose in books than play ball or chase girls. His younger brother, David, born in 1949, idolized him. But even David noticed Ted's distance, his preference for solitude over connection. At 16, Ted's brilliance earned him a scholarship to Harvard, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Picture this: a scrawny kid from Chicago, barely old enough to drive, walking into Harvard's hallowed halls in 1958. He majored in mathematics, publishing papers that stunned professors. But Harvard wasn't all golden. Ted was recruited for a psychological experiment led by Professor Henry Murray, a study some later linked to the CIA's culture program. The experiment was brutal. Students were subjected to intense psychological stress, humiliated, and interrogated to test their breaking points. Ted endured hours of verbal abuse. His beliefs mocked, his psyche probed. For a kid already struggling to connect, this was a gut punch. Some speculated deep in his distrust of authority, his rage at the system. Others say it's just a piece of the puzzle. Either way, Ted left Harvard in 1962 with a bachelor's degree and a growing sense of alienation. He went on to University of Michigan, earning a master's and Ph.D. in mathematics by 1967. His dissertation on boundary functions was so complex his advisors could barely understand it. At 25, Ted landed a job as an assistant professor at UC Berkeley, the youngest in the department's history. He was a rising star, but the spotlight burned. Teaching was torture for him. Standing in front of students, trying to explain concepts, felt like exposure. He was shy, awkward, mumbling through lectures. Students complained he was unapproachable. In 1969, after just 2 years, Ted quit. No explanation, no warning. He walked away from a dream career, leaving colleagues stunned. What came next was a slow unraveling. Ted drifted, living briefly in Chicago, working odd jobs, including a stint at his brother's factory. But he was restless, angry, disillusioned with the modern world. In 1971, he and David bought a 1.4-acre plot of land near Lincoln, Montana, a remote wilderness far from civilization. Ted built a 10 by 12-foot cabin, no electricity, no running water, just a plywood shack with a wood stove. He wanted to live off the land, to escape the machine of society. He hunted, grew vegetables, read books from the local library, and taught himself survival skills. For a while, it seemed like he'd found peace. But the wilderness wasn't the sanctuary he'd hoped. By the mid-1970s, development crept closer. Loggers, real estate developers, the hum of progress encroaching on his solitude. Ted's anger grew. He started small acts of sabotage, vandalizing construction sites, cutting power lines. Influenced by anarchist thinkers like Jacques Ellul, he began to see technology as a cancer, a force destroying nature and human freedom. In his journals, he wrote about his hatred for the technological system, his belief that it stripped people of autonomy, turning them into cogs in a soulless machine. Sabotage wasn't enough. He needed to strike harder to make the world listen. That's when the bomb started. To understand Ted Kaczynski, you've got to dig into his head, and let me tell you, it's a dark place. Ted wasn't your typical serial killer. He didn't kill for pleasure, didn't get off on blood or power. His murders were ideological, driven by a warped philosophy that saw violence as the only way to save humanity. But that doesn't make him less terrifying, it makes him more. Because a man who kills for a cause, who believes he's righteous, is a man who can justify anything. Psychologically, Ted was a paradox. He was a genius, no question, but his brilliance was tangled with deep emotional wounds. Dr. Sally Johnson, a psychiatrist who evaluated him in 1998, diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that can distort reality, fueling delusions and paranoia. She pointed to his journals, 40,000 pages of meticulous coded entries, where he described an omnipotent organization controlling society, satellites planting electrodes in people's brains. These weren't just rants. They were signs of a mind unmoored, seeing enemies everywhere. Yet Ted rejected the diagnosis, insisting he was sane, that his actions were logical, necessary. And that's the chilling part. He knew exactly what he was doing. His paranoia didn't come from nowhere. Growing up, Ted felt betrayed by the world. The Harvard experiment likely deepened his mistrust, convincing him that authority figures, scientists, psychologists, governments were manipulative, evil. His isolation in Montana amplified this, turning his cabin into an echo chamber where his hatred festered. He saw himself as a warrior, a lone crusader fighting a corrupt system. In his manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, he argued that technology was eroding human freedom, replacing authentic experiences with surrogate activities like sports or entertainment. He believed the Industrial Revolution had doomed humanity, and only a collapse of the system could save it. His bombs weren't just weapons. They were his voice, his way of screaming at a world he thought was deaf. But there's another layer to Ted's psyche, rage. His journals reveal a man consumed by anger, not just at technology, but people, neighbors, co-workers, even his own family. He wrote about his first victim, Hugh Scrutton, with cold satisfaction. Excellent! Humane way to eliminate someone. Probably never felt a thing. He admitted to acting out of revenge, not altruism, a desire to punish a world that had rejected him. Some trace this back to personal slights, like being fired from his brother's factory in 1978 after harassing a female co-worker who rejected him. That rejection, small as it seems, may have been a trigger, pushing him from vandalism to murder. Ted's intelligence made him uniquely dangerous. He was methodical, obsessive, spending months crafting each bomb. He used scrap materials, old pipes, wires, batteries, to avoid detection, sanding wood to remove fingerprints, planting false clues like notes saying, "Woo, it works. I told you it would RV," to throw off investigators. His bombs were works of art, in a sick way, each one more refined than the last. He tested them in the woods, tweaking designs to maximize damage. This was an impulse. It was a calculated campaign, a war waged by a man who saw himself as a revolutionary. Yet, for all his brilliance, Ted was emotionally stunted. He struggled with relationships, never dated seriously, and cut ties with his family over time. His brother, David, described him as distant, unable to connect. Ted's journals hint at loneliness, a longing for human contact he couldn't reconcile with his hatred for society. This tension between his need for connection and his rejection of it may have fueled his violence, turning his pain outward into destruction. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of how Ted pulled this off, because the details are as fascinating as they are horrifying. Each bombing was a masterclass in deception and destruction, a carefully orchestrated act designed to maximize impact and minimize traceability. Ted didn't just want to kill. He wanted to send a message, and every bomb was a chapter in his twisted manifesto. Target selection. Ted's victims weren't personal enemies. They were symbols. He targeted people tied to technology and industry, professors, scientists, airline executives, computer store owners, lobbyists. He chose them through library research, combing through academic journals, corporate directories, and news articles to find names and addresses. His early attacks focused on universities and airlines, hence the Unabomber moniker. Later, he broadened his scope. hitting geneticists, computer scientists, and industry figures. The randomness was deliberate. By striking across industries and geographies, he kept investigators guessing, sowing fear nationwide. Bomb construction. Ted's bombs were handmade, built from everyday materials you could find at a hardware store or junkyard. He used pipes, wires, batteries, and wood, often carving components himself. His early devices were crude, like the 1978 Northwestern bomb, which used match heads and rubber bands. But by the 1990s, his bombs were sophisticated, with barometer-triggered mechanisms and chemical explosives. He hid them in wooden boxes, books, or manila envelopes, designed to look harmless. Some had fake return addresses, or notes to lure victims into opening them. He stamped FC on metal parts, a cryptic signature that taunted the FBI. Delivery and execution. Most bombs were mailed, sent through the U.S. Postal Service to blend in with regular packages. Ted was meticulous, using specific stamps and typing addresses to avoid handwriting analysis. Some bombs, like the 1985 Sacramento and 1987 Salt Lake City devices, were hand-delivered, placed in parking lots for victims to find. The explosions were devastating. Shrapnel tore through flesh, chemicals burned skin, and the psychological impact lingered long after blast. Ted's journals described his glee of perfecting his craft, noting how later bombs were more lethal and compact. Key attacks. 1979, American Airlines Flight 444. A bomb in a cargo hold filled the plane with smoke, nearly killing 78 passengers. Ted later wrote he was relieved it failed, calling the target too indiscriminate. 1985, Hugh Scrutton. The Sacramento computer store owner kicked a wooden box, triggering a bomb that shredded his chest. Ted called it a humane kill. 1993, Charles Epstein and David Gelernter. Back-to-back bombings maimed the geneticist and computer scientist, showing Ted's growing precision. 1994, Thomas Mosser. The advertising executive's death in his kitchen, with his family nearby, was one of Ted's most heartless acts. 1995, Gilbert Murray. The timber lobbyist's office bombing was so powerful it shook the building, leaving co-workers in shock. Ted's ability to evade capture was as chilling as the bombs themselves. He left no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA. He built bombs from scrap to avoid traceable purchases. False clues like notes or mislabeled components sent the FBI down dead ends. For 17 years, he was a phantom, striking from the shadows of his Montana cabin. By 1995, Ted was tired of being ignored. His bombs made headlines, but his message, his reason, wasn't getting through. So he upped the ante. In June 1995, he sent a 35,000-word manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, to the New York Times and the Washington Post, demanding its publication. If they complied, he promised to stop killing. If not, more bombs. The FBI, led by Director Louis Freeh and Attorney General Janet Reno, urged the papers to publish, hoping someone would recognize the writing. On September 19, 1995, the Washington Post ran the manifesto as an 8-page supplement. The manifesto was a rant, but a brilliant one. Ted argued that the Industrial Revolution had enslaved humanity, replacing freedom with a technological cage. He railed against leftism, fascism, and modern society, calling for a return to wild nature. It was dense, philosophical, and chillingly coherent, written with the precision of a mathematician. Some, like anarchist Kirkpatrick Sale, called it rational, even prescient. Others, like victims' families, saw it as the ravings of a murderer trying to justify his crimes. But the manifesto was Ted's undoing. David Kaczynski's wife, Linda Patrick, read it and felt a chill. The tone, the phrasing, it sounded like Ted. She urged David compare it to Ted's old letters. The similarities were uncanny. David, torn between loyalty and duty, contacted the FBI through a private investigator, Susan Swanson, and a former FBI behavioral expert, Clint Van Zandt. Linguistic analysis confirmed the manifesto, and Ted's letters were likely written by the same person, David Betrayal. He called it a nightmare, set the stage for Ted's capture. The FBI's Unabomber Task Force, formed in 1979, was a juggernaut. 150 full-time investigators, analysts, and agents from the FBI, ATF, and U.S. Postal Service. It was the longest, costliest manhunt in U.S. history, burning over $50 million by 1996. Early profiles were off. The FBI thought the Unabomber was a blue-collar mechanic, not a Harvard-educated recluse. They chased false leads, like theories linking Ted to the Zodiac Killer, and struggled with his lack of forensic evidence. The 1987 Salt Lake City bombing gave them a break, a witness's sketch of a hooded man. But it wasn't until the manifesto that the case cracked open. David's tip led agents to Lincoln, Montana, to a tiny cabin in the woods. On April 3rd, 1996, 40 FBI agents swarmed the property. Ted, bearded and disheveled, stepped out, calm as ever. Inside, they found a gold mine, bomb components, a live bomb ready to mail, 40,000 journal pages detailing his crimes, and the original typed manifesto. The Unabomber was no longer a myth. He was a man, and he was in cuffs. Ted's trial in Sacramento was a circus, indicted on 13 bombing-related charges and 3 counts of murder. He faced the death penalty. His lawyers pushed an insanity defense, citing his schizophrenia diagnosis, but Ted fought it tooth and nail. He didn't want to be labeled crazy. He wanted his ideas to stand. In January 1998, after a suicide attempt with his underwear, Ted took a plea deal. Guilty on all counts, no death penalty, but 8 life sentences without parole. On May 4th, 1998, he was sent to ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a supermax prison in Colorado where he'd spend 23 hours a day in solitary. Ted's life in prison was as isolated as his cabin. He cut off his family, furious at David's betrayal, calling him a Judas in unpublished writings. Yet he stayed connected to the outside world, exchanging letters with hundreds of pen pals, even discussing marriage with one woman until her death in 2006. His papers, donated to University of Michigan's Labadie collection, became a trove for researchers studying his mind. On June 10, 2023, Ted was found unresponsive in a cell at Federal Prison Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, where he'd been transferred in 2021 for late-stage cancer. He was 81. 3 sources told the New York Times he died by suicide, a final act of control for a man who'd always defied the system. Ted Kaczynski's story isn't just about bombs or bodies. It's about a man who saw the world through a distorted lens and decided to burn it down. His manifesto, for all its flaws, struck a chord with some, sparking debates about technology's role in our lives. But for his victims, his ideas were meaningless. Hugh Scrutton, Thomas Mosser, Gilbert Murray, they weren't symbols. They were people with families, dreams, lives snuffed out by a madman's rage. The Unabomber case changed America. It made us wary of packages, tightened airport security, and showed how one person could hold a nation hostage. Ted's cabin, journals, and bombs are now artifacts in museums, grim reminders of a 17-year nightmare. Books like David Kaczynski's Every Last Tie and Jamie Garing's Madman in the Woods unpack the human cost, while TV series like Manhunt, Unabomber dramatized the chase. As I wrap this up, I can't shake the image of Ted in his cabin, hunched over a bomb, his face lit by a kerosene lamp, plotting his next move. It's a scene straight out of a horror movie, but it was real. Ted Kaczynski wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. No claws, no fangs. He was worse. A man with a mind sharper than most, twisted by anger and isolation, who chose to write a story in blood. And that, my friend, is the scariest thing of all.